And joining me now to weigh in is President and CEO of Enough is Enough, Donna Hughes. Donna, great to have you.
Thank you for having me. Very, very important.
Yeah, it is really important, and unfortunately, not a lot of people report on this. It's a shame, and it's really how sad how well protected child sex trafficking rings are, and it makes it really difficult when even questioning it because it makes you susceptible to being silenced, to being called a conspiracist. But this is reality. I mean, how do we navigate through this issue in today's climate, being that that's the case?
Well, I think it's really important to always shed light and shine truth onto these situations. And let me just address two issues that you brought up in your reporting. One are sex crimes against children. You described many of them. Now, child pornography, which is now being retermed by an act of Congress, I might add. Senator Blumenthal and Senator Graham, a Democrat and a Republican, introduced this bill to retitle that term to child sex abuse images, because that's what this is. So child pornography, or CSAM, as we call it, child sex abuse images, is the actual recording of a sex crime against a child. So there's a vicious cycle of abuse here, if you don't mind me explaining what I mean. When Absolutely. A child is sexually victimized or raped, and believe me, they're as young as infants, like one of your reports showed. And then that crime scene, that abuse, that rape is either videotaped or photographed. That now becomes child sexual abuse material that has been treated under the law for decades as child pornography. It's a very, very serious crime. Why? Because every time that content is viewed, used, consumed, traded, or bartered by a pedophile, a trafficker, or a sexual predator, that child is being re-victimized. This is why this is so serious. And what I believe really caught the attention of the Senate and the media and, everyone that was watching these hearings is that the sentencing guidelines are quite broad, and you at least would hope that any judge would at least prosecute and convict according to those sentencing guidelines. We did not see that happening in the case of this particular judge, and that I'm not sure if that's the case across the board, but what it led me to believe, and I've been fighting this since 1994 in all forms of sexual exploitation against children, is that people do not understand what this crime is really all about and how it is used. Another thing, when a predator views this content, they do it to sexually arouse themselves and to gratify themselves. They also use it to get into pedophile clubs. And what it also does is it fuels the appetite of other predators and pedophiles. So you just get this vicious cycle of abuse. And the opinion of those who I know, my colleagues and prosecutors who fight these crimes, we need to have a minimum sentencing guideline that is followed. In fact, Senator Josh Hawley has just introduced one. Other senators are looking at expanding upon that or doing their own to have a mandatory minimum, because we cannot just treat these crimes with a slap on the wrist. And you made a very, very important point. We are not just protecting the safety of these children, we are guarding their innocence. And once it is robbed, once it is destroyed, they suffer a lifetime of injury. And if you talk now to survivors of child sex abuse crimes, where that crime has been recorded as child pornography, they are constantly traumatized at the fear that someone will see that photograph or that video of the crime against them even 10, 15, 20, 30, and 40 years later after the crime was committed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, you've been doing this, you've been fighting this for years, and I'm curious, what do you think it's like for victims to overcome this? Because it just seems like it's kind of impossible to overcome when, with technology and everything that we have, it's a completely different, level of just exposure, constantly throughout their lives. I mean, you can't really ever just completely, wipe the slate clean. You can't just make something not exist anymore like that. It's always going to exist. How do these victims recover from that, and do they ever?
I don't know if they ever really do. I think it's just an issue of survival, dealing with the trauma and then the PTSD that comes from being re-traumatized and re-traumatized. And this is why it's so important that the maximum sentences are imposed on these crimes and even on those who are possessors of this content. And that's why the federal government, the Supreme Court, has given this such a stiff penalty just to even possess this content, not just to create it, not just to share it, not just to sell it, but to actually possess it, because now it's stored in perpetuity and can always be used and reused again by that person who has downloaded it, or anytime they want to share that content and trade it and barter it to get it with another pedophile online. And I just want to give you an important point. Last year, the highest number ever of child pornography cases were reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. 29.3 million reports. Let me break that down. 78% of those were depicting children under the age of 12. 63% of the 78 were depicting children under the age of 8 years old. And we've known from prosecutors that the cases that are getting the most attention, where that law enforcement dollars are going, are rapes and crimes against infants and toddlers. Because this is so much of a pandemic, law enforcement can't even prosecute their way out of it. So the last thing any judge needs to be doing is putting these criminals back on the street, not registering them as a sex offender, and giving them a slap on the wrist. This is unfair. It is not the rule of law, and it has to stop.
Yeah, those statistics are unbelievable. And it's just, it kind of speaks to the point that this is not a political issue. And therefore, why is it that they are politicizing this? They're making it out to be that, Republicans are coming after her. They're attacking her unjustly, that it's not fair. No, it is fair. This is a bare minimum that we're asking for as a society. All we want is for our children to be protected. And the same thing goes for the anti-grooming law in Florida now. The fact that they would even have a problem with that tells you so much about what's wrong with our society. It is such a low bar that we're asking for here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's a great way to describe it. And I think what has happened is that in the case of the law in Florida, it has just simply been reframed to something that it is not. And it's important for those of us who know the truth, and particularly for the media, to call this out, because it's not a left or a right issue. It's a right and a wrong issue. And this is a nonpartisan issue. Like I said, I've been working on these issues since 1994. It's always been with bipartisan support from Congress. And we really need to recognize that this is not something that should be dividing us. This is something that should be uniting us, and not letting anyone who wants to be partisan or try to frame this as partisan, don't let them get away with it, because it's simply not the case.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, though, is it's almost an elitist issue. It's like the people in power, regardless of who they are silencing the people like you and me who want to speak out against this. What's your advice for people that want to speak out more, want to get involved more, but are scared about the attacks? Because, I mean, there are so many from the elites that they say, we're conspiracy theorists for bringing this up. I have about 30 seconds, but I'm curious to get your response on that.
Just keep speaking the truth. Speak the truth in love. Protect the children in your own realm of influence, your own grant. If you see something, say something and report it. The good news is you have law enforcement and prosecutors on your side. They are our allies. Now we've just got to get the judicial system up to speed so that they're really throwing the book at these kinds of crimes, whether it's the actual the case of child pornography or a sex crime against a child. It needs to be treated as the most egregious crime that it is, really, against humanity. We all need to get on board with it. And, use social media platforms, share the truth, join us at enough.org. We're putting information about this all the time, and we can equip you to be on the front lines.
Absolutely. It is the most egregious crime. Thank you so much, Donna. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.